Okay, welcome everybody. We're back. Second part of our series on Samson and the state of Israel. Is there a connection between the two? Is the state of Israel the beginning of the final redemption? All connected with Samson, of course. Before we start, I heard a good line this week. There was a couple that just got married, Mazal Tov, and they get a phone call from some friends that want to come over to visit them, the new couple. So they're asking for directions. Must have been before the ways. If they're ways, we travel. Must have been before those ways days. And so they said, give us directions. The friends asked for directions how to get there. So they tell them how to get there, what street it's on, what's the address. And then it gets a little bit complicated. It says you'll see there, when you get to this address, you'll see 3 doors. One's green, one's red, and one's white. Give a kick the white door open, and then walk in. Keep on walking straight after that, and you'll see 3 other doors. You'll see 3 other doors over there. There's a blue, green, and red door. Give a kick to the red door and walk in. Don't be alarmed. You might see a few people. That's like a courtyard over there. Don't be alarmed if you see people. And then you'll get to 2 doors. One's black and one's white. Give the black door a kick, and then that's our house. So friends are listening to these instructions. They said, listen, everything's fine, but why don't we just open the door? Instead of kicking the door, why don't we open the door? So the Chatan, the groom, says, well, I'm sure that your hands are full with presents that you've come to bring us, so you have no opportunity to open up those doors. You need to kick the doors open. So watch out for those karate kicks. Okay, last week we started part 1 for 2 minutes. 2-minute warning here. We're just going to go over for 2 minutes, no longer, what we talked about. Point number 1 last week, we saw something very clear, that the tribe of Dan sticks out more than any other tribe due to the fact that they are considered to be the lowest tribe. When we look back from the time of Moses, we see that whenever there is some kind of unusual thing happening with the Jewish people, something low, some kind of sin, we always see that the tribe of Dan is involved in that. So that we saw very, very clearly with about 6 or 7 incidents. Throughout the Torah, we saw 6 or 7 incidents which prove this. It says it in Chazal itself that they are considered to be the lowest tribe. It's not something we're coming to the conclusion. It's not us to make that conclusion. Chazal themselves write this in many, many places. Okay, after that, we said even though that they are the lowest tribe, spiritually, etc., we see that there's a tremendous connection between the most spiritual of the tribes, not only the most spiritual of the tribes, but also of the kingdom, Malchut. And that's, of course, is Yehuda. Yehuda, from the tribe of Yehuda come the kings, the leaders of Israel that bring the Jewish people into Israel, fighting, etc. So we see, very interesting, that even though they are the lowest tribe spiritually, Hashem constantly is connecting them to the tribe of Judah. From the tribe of Judah comes kings, the land of Israel, and also the Messiah. Very interesting. So those are the points that we went over. In fact, when the tabernacle was built and the temple was built, there was a joint effort by these 2 tribes. Also the tabernacle, Bitzalel from Yehuda, Auliah ben Achisamach from Dan, the highest and the lowest tribes. And also when the temple was built by Shlomo HaMelech, there was Shlomo HaMelech, of course, is a king from Judah, and it was also joined by Hiram, who is from the tribe of Dan. Now, we said that to everything spiritual, you need somebody to come along who's good in the material. So you have a tremendous tag team here of Yehuda, who brings in the spirituality to the temple, and then you have also the tribe of Dan, who brings in the knowledge of how do we build things, how are we going to get this thing up, how are we going to put this in this room. You need also those two arms. And then we brought in, that's why there are two messiahs. One is a more materialistic messiah that brings the Jewish people back to a physical land of Israel, physically building the land of Israel, an army, etc. And then you have the spiritual messiah who comes from Yehuda, who comes from David. So this we see, very interesting, that there's some kind of connection between the Messiah, the tribe of Dan, and also the tribe of Yehuda. That was last week. Okay. We said that when the tabernacle was built, okay, it was built by those two tribes. When the temple was built, HaKadosh Baruch Hu intended that would be the end of history. That was going to be those two tribes were going to bring the end of history. And we will see the connection of Messiah and Dan coming shortly. Okay. We have 2 or 3 more points, new points, that just close in this idea of this joint effort by these two very, very different tribes who constantly are being put together by God. The greatest of the greats and the lowest of the lows. We usually don't see that. I was once in a yeshiva and we were receiving a special rabbi, a very, very important rabbi from somewhere in the world. And when he came to the yeshiva that I was at the time, so we started dancing, and he noticed that I was walking around with sandals. And here you have a person with a very fancy, coat and jacket and the whole works, very fancy, and he sees me. And this is in public. He turns to me and says, "You think that it's proper to dress like that? Going around with sandals?" So it was like very hard for him, a person of his, elite. How's he here with some yeshiva guy, some yeshiva bocher with sandals on? Forget the fact that this was in a public place. People heard. Besides for the fact that I have a certain medical issue with my feet that I have to go around with sandals for most months of the year. Forget about those parts. Okay? But anyway, sometimes there's people like that. But we know that in the world you don't see too many partnerships with the highest of the high, the Hollywood stars, and people that are just regular people. You usually don't see that because birds of the feathers, birds of the feathers stick with the same feathers. People usually stick to the same class that they're in. It's hard for a person to lower themselves when they're accustomed to a certain standard of life. So this is very interesting here, very unusual how this setup is working. Okay, let's go on. First point that we want to bring is the following. Check this out. Mike just asked a good question. Dan and the Messiah. Okay. So listen to this one, very interesting. It says the following. We know that there are two tribes that are likened to snakes. One, of course, is Dan. Samson is likened to a snake, how he attacks. And the other one, interesting, is, guess who? David's father is named Yishai. It says in the Gemara in Masechet Ta'anit that there were 4 people that the only reason that they passed away was because of the fact that when Adam and Eve sinned, there was a decree that everyone would have to die because of what happened because of the snake. The sin of the snake with Adam and Eve. So now there's a decree that you have to die. You might be the most righteous person, you have no sins, there's no real reason for you to die. But you have to die. In order to go on to the next world, you have to first die and then go on. There were only a few people that escaped that. For example, it says Eliezer. Eliezer went straight, living, he went straight up. Chanoch went straight up. Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh, very interesting, she went up. Serach bat Asher, she went up straight to heaven without having to go through the process of dying. Very interesting. But 99.9.99999, everyone has to die. So it says that Yishai was such a righteous person, the father of David, that he was, if it wasn't for that snake that we have to die because of the first sin, then he would have kept on living. So very interesting, we see that Dan is compared to a snake, and also Yishai, top notch, the leader of Sanhedrin, It says in Chazal that every time Yishai went out, there were hundreds of thousands of people. 500,000 people would go out with him. He was such an important person. And not only that, besides for the fact that both Dan and Yehuda are called, as we see now, snake, if you take the word Mashiach and take the word snake, unbelievable. I know it's early in the morning, so I'm not going to ask you to figure it out, or you're going to pull out your phones here and do it, but they both come out to snake and Mashiach miraculously come out to the same gematria, same amount, 358. 2 tribes who are connected to Mashiach. One is Dan and one is Yehuda, the father of Yishai from the tribe of Yehuda. So this is an amazing thing. Also interesting, it says that these are things that come, the Messiah comes without recognizing it, when you least expect it. And it's really amazing, because if you have to put your money down, if you were a betting man, Jimmy the Greek in my days, if you were a betting man and you had to put some money down, the last tribe that I would put money that would come from them, a Messiah, would be Dan, because they were the lowest of tribes and they were the sinners, as we saw. So therefore, very interesting, it says that the Messiah comes, and also snakes come without notice. They don't notify you. You don't get one of these beeps in your phone. They don't notify you before they come. And they come behesech hadat, when you don't even realize it, when you're least expecting it. Sometimes it might be like a mother-in-law, when you least expect it. Not mine, of course. Mine are great. But we're talking on the majority people. Okay. So that we see the connection right away between Yehuda and Dan, connected to Messiah. Next. If we look in the book of Judges, we see something very interesting. It says, and it's brought down in the Gemara, in Masechet Sotah, it's brought down that the first time Shimshon is walking with his parents, and he goes to a place in Israel called Timnata. Now that should ring a bell. The place Timnata should ring a bell. Why? If we open up in the book of in Breshit, Genesis, if we look in the chapter on of Vayeshev, portion of the week of Vayeshev, we see that Yehuda, listen closely, once again we have this team that never leaves one another. This tag team, the Siamese twins. On one hand we have Samson, who goes and he meets his quote-unquote shidduch, his Plishtim, Philistine wife. He meets her in a place called Timnata, and then the Gemara brings down that this is a familiar place. This is where Yehuda and Tamar got together. This is when Yehuda and Tamar, his daughter-in-law, got together. If we remember the story, Tamar was married to a son of Yehuda, Er. They got together. He did various sins. He was killed. She got married with the brother, who was Onen, and he also did the same kind of immodest sins. He was also taken away. Yehuda in the meantime said, wait till my third son gets older and then I will give him over to you. But he didn't have really any plans to do that, because if you have a daughter-in-law and two of your sons have already, another one bites the dust, oh yeah, and another one down, and another one down, yeah, Freddie Mercury, we need him over here. They were just biting the dust. So he wasn't really too thrilled to have another son of his bite the dust. So anyways, he was just, as they say in Spanish, mañana, baby. When you want to blow somebody off, you don't really want to do it. Oh, sure, mañana. I'll take care of it, mañana. Okay, so Yehuda was with the mañana. So Yehuda meets up with a woman who's a prostitute. He thinks she's a prostitute. Little does he know that it's Tamar. How did he know? His own daughter-in-law. Because the fact she was so modest, never saw her. He never saw her. And all of a sudden he sees this woman exposed. He's sure she's a prostitute. Little does he know it's his daughter-in-law. They get together, Gewalt, and they have twins, 2 kids. Zerach and Peretz. Folks, I'm surprised you're still in your seats. You haven't jumped out the window here. It's an amazing thing here. In both cases, the same place. Shimshon meets his wife, so-called wife. He meets his Philistine wife in a place called Timnata. And also Yehuda and Tamar. They get together and they begin to produce what? The Messiah, the Mashiach. The Mashiach comes from Peretz. We say every Friday evening when we go to the synagogue, Yamin usmol tifrotzi al yad ben Yishai bet halachmi. The tribe of Yehuda, the family of David, they're the ones that are called portzim. They're the ones that move, that break forward, run forward, break the chains. Got to break the chains. It's an amazing thing. So Chazal tell us that little did they know that Yehuda and Tamar, that's the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was going to bring in the Messiah to the world, through this connection of Yehuda and Tamar, in this very roundabout, very immodest, so to speak, way to do things, through a woman that he thinks is a prostitute. From there comes the Messiah. You got it. Now think about it also. Mike asked a great question. Where do we see the Messiah? With Dan. We see it with Samson. The same place. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu had plans that the Messiah was supposed to come from Shimshon. As we will soon see, straight, black and white. The Messiah was also to come from Shimshon. And therefore, he gets together with this Philistine woman. Think about it. 2 guys getting together with very, very unusual kind of women. The first in Yehuda, he thinks she's a prostitute, and we have Shimshon, he's marrying around. His parents say, listen, there's no beautiful, I know sometimes, Jews have long noses. I know that sometimes, they might not be the most pretty in the world, but, the parents say to Shimshon, there's so many Jewish girls. What are you doing? They don't get it. We have two tremendous people, spiritual people, leaders, and they're getting together with questionable women. And at the same place, bringing in the light of Mashiach. Both of them together bringing in the light, the possibility of the light of Mashiach. Last point about this connection that I want to make between Yehuda and Dan is the following. The Gemara in Bava Batra 91a tells us an amazing story. Put on a seatbelt. It says that Boaz, who happens to be Boaz is the brother-in-law of Manoach. Once again, Manoach, the father of Shimshon, is from Yehuda. The mother of Shimshon was from Dan. Very interesting. We see once again this tremendous connection. Now, folks, we have to understand something. For many, many years,
so why is he considered from Dan then?
His father's from Dan.
You said
Manoach is from father is from
Yehuda.
From Yehuda, and the mother is from Dan.
So why do we consider him from Shevet Dan? That wouldn't it go from the father?
There's different takes on. I have to look that one up. From both. Anyways, we see from here that the Torah wanted to have it here that there was a connection between, in this family, this was a very unusual situation. Why? On two levels. Listen closely. Number one, it was not, as Mike pointed out here, it was not a standard procedure, to say the least. For many years it was even forbidden. It was looked down upon to marry from a different tribe. Why? Because once you marry from a different tribe, I don't like using the word intermarry within the tribes, but if you do that, then there's a problem exactly where the inheritance goes. Or which tribe do we relate him to? If you remember what happened in the time of Moses with the person from his father, his mother was from Dan, but his father was the Egyptian, and he felt that it was his right to be in the territory of Dan, where they encamped in the desert, and there was a whole uproar with him. So it was not looked upon favorably for somebody to do what Manoach and his wife did, is that they're from two different tribes. But there's some reason that Kodesh Baruch Hu worked it out that way. He wanted these two tribes to be together in order to bring Samson, to bring the Mashiach. So what happens? So Boaz is the brother-in-law of Manoach, which means Boaz is related to is the brother of Manoach's wife. They are brother and sisters. Okay, now think about it. Boaz was considered to be the elite of his time. The elite. He had 60 children, 60 children. And his sister goes and marries who? Number one, marries out of the tribe. Looked down upon at that time. Number two, Not only does she go out of and marry someone from out of the tribe, who does she marry? She marries a person who is extremely low. She marries an Amma Aretz. Not only is he an Amma Aretz, but he's also from the tribe of Dan, which is the lowest of lows. You can imagine that it wasn't looked upon too well by the family. When I talk about the family, we're talking about the family of Boaz. It wasn't looked too well. So we see once again, very interesting, we have the top of the top, Boaz's sister. She goes out and marries the bottom of the bottom, Manoach, from the tribe of Dan. From them come this child, Shimshon. Now in fact, in that same Gemara, listen to this, put on a seatbelt, it tells the following story. Boaz had 60 kids, and he never invited his brother-in-law Manoach and his sister to the weddings. Why? Because his brother-in-law and his sister had no children, and he did not want to offend them by inviting them. You know, think about it. A person, let's say, doesn't have kids. You start inviting them to a bris. You know, it's kind of like, or someone's having trouble getting married, and then you invite them to a wedding, or you invite them to an engagement party. You might be like, kind of like throwing salt in his eyes or rubbing on a wound here. Anyways, the Gemara says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not look favorably to this deed. Now, if you do such a thing, even though the intentions were good, the fact is that Manoach never knew that. If you want to do something like that, if you want to pull a stunt like that, it's good to tell somebody, listen, I love you, guy, but I don't want to hurt your feelings. I don't want you to feel bad. If you feel bad, please, you don't have to come. Know that you're invited. He didn't do that. He kept his good intentions to himself. How many times in life, wow, this guy didn't invite me. If he would have just, or she would have just said something, you know what? The reason why, because of A, B, C, D, we could have avoided a tremendous fight here, a tremendous argument, dispute. So many times it's called communication. If we have communication, we could solve a lot of the problems. A lot of problems that stem from the world are a lack of communication. When there's a lack of communication, I think, you think, boom, explosion. Okay, so what happens? So all these 60 kids of his die. All these 60 kids of his die. So the Gemara finishes and tells us an amazing thing.
All 60 kids
of Boaz. Boaz died. So the Torah tells us, the Gemara finishes there in Bava Batra with a tremendous ending. It says, I will give you a son who is 60 times greater than your 60 kids that passed away. So Rashi brings down, who's he talking about? He's talking about he's talking about Yishai. He's talking about David HaMelech, who was equal to the people of Israel, 60, Shishim Ribo, 500,000 people, like they went out of Egypt. He's equal to the Jewish people. But Rashi brings down there that there's also in various Gemarot, what it says there is not David or Yishai that are equal to 60, but it's talking about Samson. I will give you a son who is equal to 60. Now it's very interesting. When Samson lifts up the gates of Gaza, it says that, so to speak, we have to understand there's something spiritual here. It says that the length between his two shoulders were 60 handbreadths, 60 amot. So of course, it wasn't that big. We have to understand that numbers have a spiritual meaning to them. But right now we'll leave that on the side. Okay, so now it says by King David that he would sleep less than 60 breaths. 60, this question, horse breaths. But both King David and Samson, they have the number 60 connected with them. Very interesting. And the Gemara says, Hashem took 60 of the sons of Boaz and he will give them a son which is equal to, to the 60. King David, we said, 60. He would sleep only less than a certain amount of time. It's called 60 horse breaths. And we have, on the other hand, Manoach, who was the person that was offended here. He was not invited to the 60 weddings. He will receive a son who will be equal to the 60. How is that? Because in a different Gemara it says that was the shoulder space, the 60. So we have, once again, very interesting, we have in this Gemara a connection between the two with King David, the Messiah, and also Shimshon, who we see also had the opportunity. We have the opportunity to be the Messiah. It didn't work out, but he had the opportunity to be Messiah. Okay, that's the part we finish as far as Dan and Yehuda goes. Now, we want to know, the next portion, we're going to talk about what was special. We talked about last week what was special in a negative light with the tribe of Dan. Spiritually, they were the lowest of lows. But there's something that, for the good, that Dan stood out more than any other tribe. Let's look what that point is. Let's look at what the point is. What does Dan stand for? The Zohar Kadosh, he writes in the portion of the week of Balak, it's on page 194, side A. I warn you, we're going to go for an unbelievable ride here. Very interesting story here the Zohar gives us. Very spiritual here. So put on a double seatbelt here, because we're going for the whammy. Okay. Now, how did Bilam get killed? That's the story here behind it. You're going to find out what the newspapers didn't print, the Zohar prints. How did they nail it? Listen to this. I'm going to explain the Zohar in English. When Bilam saw Pinchas, he was so afraid that he flew into the air. He disappeared into the air with his two sons. Who were his two sons? He had two sons. One was Yonus and one was Yumbrus. Yonus and Yumbrus. Well, that's some heavy name. Some heavy name. I'm glad I don't have like kids like that in my class. You know, we have like simple names like David, Yosef. I keep it simple, you know. So the Zohar immediately asks a question here. Time out here on the court for the Zohar. Didn't those two guys were the instigators of the sin of the calf? If you remember, the Torah says that like 3,000 people were killed. What does it mean, like? You don't know how to count? The Torah knows how to count millions of people. It doesn't know how to count 3,000? Kishloshet alafim? Like 3,000? Around 3,000? So Chazal tell us that there were two people that made themselves felt. They made propaganda as if they were 3,000 people. Imagine that. Today, I would liken it to the regular media, like to the standard media. Right? They have their agendas, and they make themselves look like they're thousands of people. Their voice, as if, represents. Look at the leftists. How many are there? But they make themselves, they're in key positions, that they're able to make themselves felt as if there are so many of them. So these two people, we understood, they were the instigators to bring the Jewish people down and to have them sin with the golden calf. So what happened to them? God punished them. And that's why he doesn't say doesn't say an exact number, because these two people were the instigators. They were likened to 3,000 people. They made themselves propaganda. They made themselves felt like 3,000 people would make themselves felt. Okay, so what does it mean here? These people are, of course, they're killed. They're no longer here. But it says that Bilam, he used the special magic that his sons knew. They were tremendous in magic and all kinds of various sorceries that they would do. Okay, so he's able to make himself disappear. Bilam disappears. So what happens, folks? Don't get too nervous. So he takes all of his magic from his sons, and he disappears into thin air. He disappears into the air. Okay, so now what happens? One guy, Pinchas, comes up and says to one guy, listen, I want you to go after him. Who is that guy? Guy's name is Saliyah, from the tribe of what? You guessed it, Dan. He calls him up and says, listen, Saliyah, come by here. And he teaches him, a few tricks of the trade, how to do it. And he goes after him. He makes himself disappear, and he's going after him in the sky. Okay, they're going after each other in the sky. All of a sudden, Saliyah looks around, and he can't find him. He can't find him. So what happens? Pinchas yells to him, listen, do this and do that, and you'll be able to find him. So he yells out, you'll be able to find him, here's what to do. Now we have to understand, Saliyah, the Zohar tells us that he took upon himself a tremendous danger of his life. Because this guy Bilam is not a simple guy. This guy knows all the tricks in the books. This guy takes God's names. This guy is full of impurities. This guy is big. This guy is top league. And now you're going in his kind of turf. This guy Saliyah from Dan, he's going in his turf. So we have to understand that he took a tremendous risk to try to go after Bilam to finally kill him. Okay, next. He says something, listen to this, very interesting. He says that the Bilam, this wicked Bilam, he made himself into a male snake. Once again, he uses all these kinds of magic, black magic, all this sorcery. He turns himself into a snake. Now, very interesting, because who else is called in the Torah who is likened to a snake? Dan. Samson is likened to a snake. So we have Mr. Bilam here, and who's going after him? Somebody from the tribe of Dan. And now he's trying to overcome, Bilam is trying to overcome Saliyah, and he turns himself into a male snake. But we know that, as we said, Dan is also likened to a snake. So Saliyah turns himself spiritually into a snake. But this snake is different. This snake has both male and female parts. And therefore, he's able to overcome him spiritually. His snake is able to overcome Bilam in his snake, which is just a male part. He comes to him with a male and female part. Anyways, Baruch Hashem, Yitkadal v'Yitkadash, Bilam is no longer here. Saliyah is able to be victorious, and he's the one that kills Bilam. Interesting, from the tribe of Dan. Once again, snake, Mashiach, snake, same gematria. Interesting. Next, the Zohar goes out and says something very interesting. He says, listen, King David King David had, who was his strongest soldier? Who was his biggest defender? A person named, listen to this, Ira Hayairi. Ira Hayairi was the right-hand man, the guardian of David, the guardian of Israel. The tremendous military mind behind King David's success in battle was from a person named Ira Hayairi. Can anyone guess what tribe he's from? The Zohar brings down, you got it, the Zohar brings down that this advisor to King David in the matters of battles was, of course, from the tribe of Dan. So we have Tziliah killing Bilam from the tribe of Dan. We have King David, his military advisor and biggest defender is also from the tribe of Dan. But it gets even better. Listen to this part of the Zohar. The Zohar goes on to write the following, and listen to these words closely. It says by the blessing that Jacob gave Dan, it says that Noshech ikvei sus, that he gives Dan the blessing that they will be able to destroy chariots, military that come after them with horses, they'll be able to destroy them. Who's that? We said that's Ira Hayairi from the tribe of Dan. But it also says Vayipol rochvo achor. Jacob announces that the riders of the horses will fall backwards. They will fall behind, down on the floor behind them. Who's this? Sariah. A person named Sariah. Anyone have a guess what tribe he's from? Also from Dan. Ha'atid lavo im Mashiach ben Yosef vehu mishevet Dan vehu atid lasot nikamot u'milchamot b'shar umot ha'olam. Folks, I mean, it's really great that you're sitting here. The Zohar Kadosh sheds a tremendous light, a secret here. That just as we saw that when in the times of Pinchas, when they needed somebody to do war against the wicked, they chose from the tribe of Dan. And in the times of King David, he took as advisor a person from the tribe of Dan. So too, when the time comes for the Mashiach to come, the material, the Mashiach ben Yosef, when it comes his time to fight against the nations of the world, he will bring with him, the Mashiach ben Yosef will bring somebody named Sariah from the tribe of Dan. And these two together, the Mashiach ben Yosef and his assistant from the tribe of Dan, they will fight and do vengeance against the nations of the world. And listen to this. If you see such a sight that the Jewish people are being victorious and fighting against the nations of the world, look for the Mashiach to come. Why? Because right after that verse we just quoted about how they will be able to attack the horses, bite them and attack them and destroy them, and the rider of the horse who we just attacked, he will fall down. That's a symbol of the nations falling down. When that starts happening, the next words are Lishuatcha kiviti Hashem. Hashem, we are waiting for your redemption. So this is a sign when you see wars against the nations of the world, when you see vengeance, when you see various people opening up their mails and getting bombs, boom, goodbye, guy, you're out. Done. Okay. Sure. So when you see all these acts of vengeance, etc., so this is the sign that Sariah from the tribe of Dan and also the Mashiach ben Yosef are very, very close to bringing in the final redemption, Lishuatcha Kiviti Hashem. Now, our last point today, before we have to cut it here, got to keep it reader friendly. 45 minutes I was taught to keep the classes. Okay, listen to this one. Put on another seatbelt because we're going for a ride here. In the tractate of Megillah, on the 17th page, first side, there's the Gemara asks to explain why the Anshe Knesset Akdolah, the great assembly of 120, why they stationed the Amidah in the way that they did. There's a reason. It wasn't just haphazard that our Amidah prayers are in a certain order. Every single paragraph is connected to one another. There's a build-up here. So the Gemara asks, why in the Amidah that we say 3 times a day, on Sabbath 4 times, why is it that is the 7th blessing of the Amidah? Once again, if you start counting, Magen Avraham, Mechayeh Meitim, Hakel HaKadosh, Chonen Adat, Harotze B'Tshuva, then we have Chanun Amarbel Isloach, 6, Goel Israel. The 7th blessing of the Amidah is the blessing of redemption, Geulah, Goel Israel. The Gemara asks, why was that made to be the 7th? Why not the 6th? Why not the 5th? Listen to this unbelievable. The Gemara says, because King David comes, the Messiah comes in the 7th year, in the Shemitah year, the year that we're in right now. So, all we need here is like, we need Mordechai ben David. Mashiach, Mashiach, Mashiach. Oh, whoa, yo, 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 yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay, or the Beitar soccer, that's their like theme song, I think. Okay, anyways, so the Gemara asks, why is that? Why is it the 7th? Because that the Messiah comes in the Shemitah year. The Gemara says, no, there's a mistake here. The Messiah does not come in the 7th year, he comes in the 8th year. Motzei Shvit, when the Shemitah year is finished, when the beginning of the 8th year, that's when the Messiah comes. Listen to this expression. Listen closely. The only where in the Torah that it uses the expression of Atchalta di Geula, the beginning of the redemption, is right here on this Gemara, on Megillah Yud Zayin. The Gemara says, how do we solve this contradiction? Either the Messiah is coming in the 7th year, or he's coming in the 8th. The Gemara says, cool down, calm down, no problem here. He says the following: wars are the beginning of the redemption. Well, we said that the Geula comes on the 7th, that's why it's the 7th blessing. That's the beginning of the redemption. And those are the wars represent the beginning of redemption. And after the wars, then we have the coming of the Mashiach. So the Gemara uses the terminology once of beginning of the redemption when it's talking about wars. Wars are the clearest sign of the beginning of the redemption. Now, if you think about it, when's the last time the Jewish people fought wars? It's been 2,000 years, approximately. So we see here, very interesting, when you start seeing wars between the Jewish people and other nations, this is the beginning of the redemption. Now something even more mind-boggling. If we count, this is not in the Gemara, but if you look, there are 2 places in the Torah where the tribes were blessed. One is in Breshit, in Genesis, in the last portion, Vayechi, by Jacob, and one's in the last portion of the Deuteronomy, in Vizot HaBracha, by Moses. These are the 2 places, 2 sources. Now if you count up, if you're looking for Dan's blessing, you will see both in Genesis and both in Deuteronomy that you know what number blessing, you know what Jacob and Moses, when they give out the blessings, so they give it out one to the 12 tribes. Here, you're first, you're second. Does anyone have a good guess what number Dan is in both those places? 7th. Yeah, burn baby, burn. 7th. The Gemara in Megillah says, when you see wars, this is the clearest sign. This is the beginning of the redemption. And that's why the blessing in Amidah, in our Amidah prayers, the 7th blessing is redemption. And redemption, we said, comes in the 7th year. But not really. It comes after wars in the 7th year. And at the 8th year, that's when the Messiah comes, after the wars. And we just saw unbelievable Zohar, and we talked about it last week, that what was done special about? They took them to the army. We talked about that. Who goes into the army? When you pick out, you know what I'm saying, in Israel you have to go, so you have no choice. So you get also good people. You also get the low lives, but there's also good people. But look in the armies where you just volunteer. You just go in. We talked about it last week. Who are those people going in? Man, usually those are the lows of the earth going in there. That's what they were famous for. They were the soldiers. You need some soldiers? You go to Dan. We saw in the Zohar Kadosh. What are they famous for? Fighting. Fighting the beginning of the redemption. Fighting the beginning of the redemption. Dan, always number 7 when it comes to receiving the blessing by Jacob or Moshe. They're the 7th tribe to be blessed. To be continued next week.